just for the nice people. And I want you to know this. I cleaned my cup special just
And I did the same.
That's just wonderful.
I can't go on with bread with a coffee cup with this many drips on it.
I know it's like it's unseemly.
It's a, but then look at you. You're a, I'm very fond of how you look with the beard, right? I mean, I'm definitely in the Southern gentleman vibe, and you definitely carry it off. And then you got the suit and the tie on. And meanwhile, I've gone from an Oxford shirt to a hoodie. When
I was commenting before we started recording on it. Looks rather monkish because it has a hood and it's brown. It's very nice looking.
it's very suitable. I have because when you joined the church in the medieval era, when you joined the church, you had to give up your goods to the church, right? So you basically bought your way into the franchise, right? I mean, if you're going to be part of the game, it's different when you're sort of just there, but if you're part of the clerisy, you buy your way in, right? I mean, it's a franchise, the shareholder. And so whenever a member of my family would join the church, it would list the stuff that they put in. And so you have this pretty interesting view.
Yeah.
And of course, in England, they're second only to the Germans in record keeping, and the Germans do it better, but the British have been doing it longer. So you have all these bits, and it's the same thing with my family in France, Avranches, which is right next to it's this town to the east of the Chateau Mont Saint Michel, and there's these little things, this little paperwork. They file paperwork back then. Believe it or not, in the 10th century, mostly what you're doing is you're testifying. If you're a reputable person, you're testifying that this transaction is legitimate, right? I mean, because you can't. I mean, we forget how hard it was to trust people. I mean, we tease ourselves today, but I mean, and throughout most of history, you can't trust a fucking person for anything, right? So you have these. So and then of course I have plenty of ancestors who were Puritans, which were pretty strange people in retrospect. But anyway, so
let's not judge them.
I'm not judging. I'm not keeping up with your decorum.
You're doing fine, Kirk.
This is despite the fact that, when I'm the kid that went to college and wore a blazer every day.
Attaboy.
I'm that guy, right? In my age, it was blue jeans, sneakers, Oxford shirt, blazer, and you were hot shit, right? Anyway. All right. So I don't know why. I haven't had any caffeine this morning. So I just must be feeling better. Anyway, so I guess you're happy to be here this morning?
Very pleased. I did, my day was a little bit longer than usual. I saw patients longer, but I saw about just a little bit under what I would prefer to see. But I worked an extra hour and a half or so, or almost 2 extra hours, and I was able to accomplish some continuing medical education, which is I normally don't regard it highly, but I enjoyed this and I learned some stuff that will be helpful to me in my clinical practice, which I thought was very useful.
Fascinating.
And it's just pain medicines, and it's like and it's like this is one that there's so much superstition in the medical establishment about it, because it's like we don't know what the rules are. And it's like, this is from the CDC, this educational stuff that I'm getting. And I'm like, it's very helpful and alleviates much anxiety, free-floating anxiety about this process, which is really difficult for patients. And it's caused some disturbance in relations between doctors and patients because of it.
Right.
And so I'm like, I did 2.5 hours of work I worked for about 5 hours, almost 6 hours.
Wow.
And I did two hours of CME in there, or 2.5 hours of CME, and it alleviated my anxiety and created some clinical opportunities that are going to be in the future. And I'm like, this is all good.
Excellent.
And
So,
now I got to help Kurt, and I'm not asking for more today. This is awesome.
so, so, uh, so is there anything not, because I understand the pain medication problem for medicine, right? I get it. So was there anything really innovative, really?
No, what it did was it provided some metrics by which you can use as standards for behavior in the clinic as a provider. So then it allows you to measure your behaviors and treat the patients in a manner that is in accordance with the CDC training. They went far, and I did laugh. I did not like it. There was a couple parts that I didn't like. One of which the clinicians and the patients were wearing masks because it was in 2022, and I started laughing and I cussed them. So and that's okay. So that the political correct part was in there, and I could tell who was writing this stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's okay. I can work past it.
Mhm.
Right. And that's okay. So I did that. And like I say, I'm very pleased about it. And I intend to do more of them, which I didn't. And I only did this because it's like I need to get this training was required by hang on. One state. One state ordered me to that I need to get 3 hours. And so I'm like, okay. And so I promised them that I would do that. So now I'm making good on that. And it actually turned out to be something that helped me for a change. How about that for weird? There was another one that I did this week, which was on human trafficking, which was also helpful and interesting.
Oh, this ought to be fascinating. Go ahead.
No, I apologize for detouring us from your
Oh, it's
work.
fascinating. The audience
This one,
loves this shit.
this one goes to the story I told you about my uncle, the psychiatrist. And it goes like this, that I tell the story like this, and it only became evident this week when I was ordered to take that CME as well. And so I took it for Texas, and it was an hour and a half, and I did that one during my clinical activities this week. And the story of my uncle for the audience, my uncle was a psychiatrist, and shortly before his death, I had the temerity to ask him this question, because there's two stories about where multiple personalities come from. Okay, and they're diametrically opposed.
Yes.
And the cover story, that's what I call it, is that the unethical therapists or improper therapy causes people to have false memories implanted of ritual satanic abuse. This is the satanic panic theory.
Yes.
Okay, that's number one. Number two is no, they're actually victims of ritual satanic sexual abuse. And so I said, you know what? I could ask my uncle. I was inspired some years ago to ask my uncle, and I did. And he said, in every town you go to, there is a church of such a nature. And there's three kinds of doctors. There's the doctors who believe the cover story, and he calls them the do it business as usual doctors. There's the type of doctor my uncle was, type 2 doctor, is the doctor who helps the people escape. The third type of doctor, which are not to be found because they get destroyed by the powers that be, because the people who do this behavior are in high places in our social structures and will destroy you. So they're not done. And so I bring that story to light because my uncle, before he died, he was very near his deathbed. If he wasn't on his deathbed, when I told him, I said, it's time for the type 2 doctors is over. It's time for the type 3 doctors. And so this CME suggests to me there's an infrastructure in place for doctors to go after these people, and not just the doctors, but a social system and a systematic process by which he was conducting his personal or professional activities alone. And so I'm like, that was very helpful to me and very it buoyed my spirits a bit.
Excellent.
And so like I say, things are lining up nicely, even if the powers that be don't want them to.
Mhm.
It looks to me like things are lining up the way they ought to line up, and the people are being properly woken up the way they need to wake up to accomplish the objectives we need. And so this is, I think the fellow's name is Doug Morrison. That's the
Yeah,
Northwest
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Project.
yeah, yeah.
And so I've been having some conversations with those guys, and they seem to be revolutionary. They think it needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And I'm like, well, I don't believe that's necessary. And it may be, but we must explore all opportunities
Well,
for redress.
that's how I discuss with them too, is that uh, you guys have made the decision that it can't be done. I'm in the position it might still be able to be done. And
And it
so
doesn't matter.
it doesn't make
We
any
we
difference.
just organize anyway, and then we work on the natural law because that is necessary.
It's necessary either way. For us, it doesn't make any difference which way it ends up. Our
That's
work
right.
is necessary.
That's right.
So, you know,
And we're not saying they're wrong. So no negativity between our groups on the right
no,
about our differences of opinion because
no.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's because I think we end up in this position, and I think because I have to attack a thing to understand it, right? I mean that's how I do by falsification, right? What's so funny?
It's just Kurt's. That's why he has such a
It
reputation.
is. It's like I have to falsify a
I,
thing.
I'm obligated to emotionally disturb you.
Yes. Well, I
If I
mean,
don't do it, I'm not doing my job.
well, here's a fascinating insight that I don't think is commonly understood. So, I'm cognitively, I'm a conservative, even though politically I'm a libertarian, right?
Okay.
So, cognitively, I'm conservative, which is basically I'm an empiricist, which is what
Yeah.
conservative means, right? You're a left, you're a progressive, you're a utopianist, and if you're a conservative, you're an empiricist. That's really the. And so when you see that the left engages in demand for emotional expression, in other
Mm,
words, they want to hear what they call authenticity. What they
mm,
mean is they want to hear your emotional intuition. They don't want to hear your reason. Your
okay.
reason, if it exists, is just a vehicle for expressing the truth of your emotions,
Okay.
right? A conservative works the opposite way. You're skeptical because you want to know the truth of your intuitions, emotions. We would say intuitions rather than emotions, but the left uses emotions the way we use argument, right? I mean, it's the same,
Okay.
the two things. So that's, empathizing in time means emotion, but emotion is driven by intuition. And
Mm,
reasoning over time is driven by intuition to have intertemporal validation, right? So you have two different kinds of validation. So I'm just I'm doing the same thing a leftist does to get to authenticity, but they use authenticity by conformity, and we use authenticity by adversarial competition. In other words, I have to get beyond your arguments to find out what you really feel, right? And
yes.
feel.
Yes.
And the left has to get beyond your words to get to what you think and feel. It's just that we take opposite approaches, validation versus falsification, to be able
Mm,
to get to those positions.
mm.
Does that make sense? So
I understand that.
I'm just an extreme case.
You
Don't
are,
say
you
anything.
are, you are,
I
you
knew.
are.
I
I'm gonna
opened
have to
that door,
drink
didn't
from,
I?
you're gonna force me to drink my coffee.
I opened that door, right? I mean, I just opened the bar door on that one.
This
I'm
is
an
why
extreme
Kurt, I
case.
only hang with dangerous men. I only hang with the most dangerous men. It's like odd extremum.
But that's a fundamental insight between the left and the right. So when the problem with the issue you brought up, which I'm really trying to educate the audience about, is that, the left tries to get to agreement, right? Where the right tries to uh, specialize, right, in their means of coercion or organization. And
Yes.
so you get this factionalization on the right that you don't get as severely on the left. On the left, it's a matter of still trying to maintain group cohesion by
Right.
finding some coordination of oppression, the way the right tries to get to a agreement by some coordination of conspiracy. But they're the same behaviors expressed through the masculine and feminine lens. Why? Because conspiracy is an expression of peerage power, and the left oppression is a concept of submissive power. In other words, you're being dominated, right? So you're being competed with, and by someone who's got more numbers than you, versus you're being oppressed by someone who's got more power than you. So again, these are just natural expressions of the masculine versus feminine intuition affecting how we interact. But so I use the falsificationary method. I mean, you know this, right? I mean, how stubborn am I at getting?
Hard-headed, man.
And I mean, I got to be certain that I've covered all the bases before I take on a position. And so, what's happened though is that I created this alienation with these groups, right? The Nazis, the ethno nationalists, the civic nationalists, the Christians and libertarians, which are sort of the big bundles I use, right? I mean,
Mhm.
um, and so I attack each of those groups because I want to understand them. And so, but very few groups will forgive me afterwards once I understand them. Uh,
So I will enter this into the public record, which is my discovery recently. I'm watching the people on our side, the right, and their fragmentary nature and their negativity towards one another, and I'm offended by it. And
yes,
I try to enter into such conversations is that negativity is not valuable. It is necessarily harmful, and to cause them to be able to work together on what we can work together on. To
it's the male version of shaming, right? This
yes,
is the male
yes,
version of shaming. It's completely it's it's destructive, right? I mean, that's where you're going to go.
yes. It's prevention. It prevents cooperation, and it's corrosive to our integrity
Yeah.
as a group
So
and
this
our
gets
goals at large.
so this gets to our position, which is we don't really need. I don't. If you're in the fundamentalist camp, great. If you're in the libertarian camp, great. If you're in the civic nationalist camp, great. If you're in the ethno nationalist, great. If you're in the national socialists, great. Which is really the feminine to masculine spectrum that I've just
Yes.
covered, or other. And so, of the conservative side, which is the social to the state, right? Social to the commercial to the state, which the dominance, the means of dominance expression. So when you're in that spectrum, we don't care, because our position is let 1,000 nations bloom. The only thing we need to agree on is the law, the natural law, right? That
Right.
everything else is just preference.
Yes, and what I also saw this week was Rudyard is making some moving in the same direction, putting out very helpful, I regard as healing energy towards our differences, and describing the antagonism against our preferences properly. And I very much appreciated his work this week, and I do always, but more so this week.
I know he's affected me quite a bit, and I've affected him quite a bit. But
See it.
what I see with him is, he's a very smart young guy. We have a handful of those guys out there. Not necessarily we like in our movement, but we like humanity.
Yes.
I mean, there's one that's in Politico this week. They find this guy who's a master of parliamentary procedure. So he
Okay.
knows more than the people who run the parliamentary system in the Congress, right? I mean, and they're thinking this is some retired parliamentarian who who has an interest. No, turns out it's a 20-year-old fucking college student in the UK who just happens to be fascinated by it, right? So he reads all the books. And
Attaboy.
because he's at that stage of his development, he developed the mental framework. I mean, he's basically customized himself to
Yes.
work in this method. Now, at this point, he's the go-to resource if you
Mm.
want to know procedure, parliamentary procedure, which is, I mean, honestly, I mean, you bring up alchemy once in a while, which is, I find charming. And Burroughs, I used to mean that in a non-complimentary way, but now that I understand how Brad's tried to comprehend the thought through history, I don't mean it that way. But so that
Took the poison out, did it?
well, I mean, I'm like everybody else. I just try to learn, right? I mean, if something doesn't make sense to me, I pursue it until it makes sense, or I can dismiss it. In this case, I see what you're doing, right? Okay. So, but Rudyard's at that same point where he's 22 years old now. So he's basically got a brain that's custom developed for grand modeling of human history.
Oh, yes.
And so, you know, and I mean, I've read a lot of books, but this guy is going to catch me. I mean, and the difference being I have to cover a broader range of subjects. But I mean, if you get into his history, I mean, this guy is, he's the wood chipper of historical content, you know. So what I see when he's talking is because realize I love this guy, he's a good friend of mine, is I see his development in parallel with his statements. So it's a
Yes.
very honest reflection of his perception of the world coming out in these comments. And this is why I love the guy, is because he's a profoundly moral man. Like,
Yes.
I mean, I would consider both of us. He's a very forward, and he's on the more priestly side of the world. He cares about how people feel in their world at the time, which is sort of the opposite of my world, right? How do I manage? How do I keep society going somewhere? Because I think of it from aristocratic perception. How do we keep society going in a positive direction that's advantageous, despite the fact of these distributions of ability in our populations?
Right.
So it's just, yeah, his in his production, he's producing at the kind of volume I was producing in 14, 15, 16. It's really, in other words, he's clearly going through his transitional phase to from specialist to generalist to contextualist. I haven't had this conversation with him. I suppose I should, or I'll just send him this. Um,
That's wonderful.
so yeah, he's doing a great job. But we got a bunch of young guys out there who are, you know, the internet has made information. If you want to become an expert in something, it's just there. You just have to have an interest in it. And
But that's what's interesting is like, okay, so now it's just a matter of what's your interest and how much time are you willing to expend to gather it together?
well, I mean, the value is it how many people can when you're young and you have time, when you're under 25 or 30, right? You've got time where you don't have later in life, because as you accumulate responsibilities in life, your
That's right.
time compresses. So when you're young, you have the most time to become an expert in something. Well, you can be expert in trying to bang your girlfriend, or you can be expert in other things. I mean, I'm trying to be humorous, but you can pick whatever you want to be an expert in.
That's right.
And if you pick something that's scarce but valuable, which is the thing. Your fascination with 90s rock bands, right? Um,
Right.
or 80s hair bands. Is that what I'm thinking? Yeah, 80s hair bands.
Right.
That's not either rare or of value to anyone, right? That's self-entertainment, right? But I mean, if you're going to study parliamentary procedure or mathematics or anything between, right? And you can master that by the time you're in your 20s, right? Early
God,
20s.
it's just a blow away.
You essentially set. That kid, I mean, they're going to compete over him. Man, he's 20 years old. He's going to get out of college, right? And he don't even have to go to, he won't have to go to college. He'll get
That's right.
hired by God knows what firms to just keep being what he is and answering questions. I mean, he'll likely get on someone's staff, right? Which is
Oh yeah.
right. He'll have to be one of those guys, but he can tell you what's the difference between the British parliamentary and our, how
Mm.
would they handle it and how would we, and what
Oh,
rules applied in this case. And I don't know if you know this, but you're not afraid of 1,000-page volumes, right? But I mean, the code for parliamentary procedure in America is it's over 1,000 pages. It's not exactly. He finds it interesting, probably like I would find reading back when I was a kid. I found reading books on programming languages interesting, right? If it's the same kind of stuff, because it's really parliamentary procedure is just programming for humans instead of
right.
machines.
Right.
So
Right. It's operating systems for large institutions.
yes, and it's really as long as you follow it, which of course
They don't.
the left tries to avoid at all purpose, all opportunities.
Only
Which is
at any convenient moment.
anyway, all right. So we've gone off on a tangent there. What I was really
What?
our original point
Yes.
was that we can get along with all the factions because all we're saying is essentially here are your parliamentary rules.
I like
Right?
that.
Here's how we get along together in the face of the enemy. Right? But how you manage stuff at the local level, which is where you would say, here's the polity I want to belong to, is different
Yes.
when you look at the federation level, which is how we get along together. And as we've articulated, as long as you're willing to ensure each other's uh, sovereignty, reciprocity, demonstrated interest, sovereignty and demonstrated reciprocity, stay word indeed, how you operate internally. What are you doing? What are you
I
laughing
had
at?
to, yeah, what I had to make, I had to react because the unfortunate, you're so used to saying these things that are actually quite important as in a glissade. It's just like that made me have to make a face because it's like you think they understood what you said. Does that make sense? Because
They
I
have to
think
adhere. The natural law is set design operate maximizes cooperation and suppresses imposition. Right. That
yeah,
natural law is simply the reciprocal assurance of sovereignty in your demonstrated interests, demanding, in other words, necessitating reciprocity in display, word, and deed, where reciprocity does consist of demand for duty, uh, truth, and what we would call excellence, which is don't skate on the margins, right? It would be a full accounting or completeness of your duty. If you do those things, then we can cooperate regardless of our differences. However, that difference is for trade. It doesn't necessarily, in other words, interaction between groups as well as within groups, but how you organize that within groups, the polity, by faith or by philosophy or by rules or by the state or whatever, and whether it's ethnically homogeneous or ethnically heterogeneous or homogeneous to heterogeneous in any dimension. That's really a matter of your choice. Now, of course, if you choose heterogeneity, you're going to get a state, right? If you choose, right, a state, because you're going to have to decide. And though a state can make change at a certain rate, if you change faith, you are going to reach homogeneity, but you cannot make change at any rate, at any substantive rate. And if you choose natural law or what we do, then you can make a change at a median rate, but you'll have the most evolutionary rate. So you will end up on this pyramid, this triangle. You don't have a choice. You're going to end up with, because those are the only three ways of coercion, right? Or persuasion, or you're going to end up with the social persuasion, forced persuasion, or remunerative persuasion. That's all you're going to get. So you're going to end up with those three. You can't do anything else. So you can vary them, like you can put a combination of them, which is what the West does. You can be like Islam and be religious. You can be like China and be state. You can be like, America, which is the most Western of Western civilization, because we have the most natural law system we have, despite the corruption that's overwhelming it defeating it at the moment. We at least we had the intentions originally of keeping it away from authoritative. But anyway, all right, so you're going to end up with those. So anyway, we can get along with everybody, but now that I've insulted them all, that's really hard. It's sort of like I called your baby ugly, and now you don't want to have me over for Thanksgiving dinner.
Well, I wanted to thank you for that very clear exposition. It was very clear and understandable. And what I would like to do is to make a break in the production so that we can post that separately.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because it's a short and it's well done.
Okay, let's end this. Go do your thing and
Oh,
wait a
I
minute.
get to do my thing.
Okay.
Hey, do hit like and subscribe and notification bell, because you want to hear when these come out. These are important. And then you can leave comments and tell Kurt that his brown robe looks wonderful.
I look like me in my hoodie. All right. Okay, today's Saturday, March 9th, 2024. We just had a great little chat on a number of things, and hopefully you'll watch the working session that follows. I'm sorry that I've shared my screen, so you're looking at
What's going to come? It's like the Christmas future.
All right, we'll stop this recording and start another one.
If you can find